is Lee Habib, and this is Our American Stories, and it's our This Day in History time, and we're going to spend an hour on this person who you know. Well, let's put it this way. You know the brand he created. You may not know him. And as always, this is brought to you by Hillsdale College, the great folks there. And we don't just do political figures. We've done Alexander Hamilton and Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher. And we do sports figures. We just did Yogi Berra. We did Johnny Carson. We're doing Frank Sinatra. We love business leaders. We've done Ray Kroc, Truett Cathy, J.P. Morgan, and Sam Walton and Andy Grove. And today, well, you're about to hear one heck of a story.
What do you say, guys? Let's do it!
I'm gonna run, make a run to the hardware store. I need a new screen for my old screen door. Washers and screws and nails by the pound. You can't find it there, can't be found. If it ain't in store, they can order it square. Peg, round hole, they'll make it fit. Whatever you need and a whole lot more, they got it all over at the hardware store.
In a time not too far away, if you wanted to fix your house, you might not have. You might not have because you didn't know how to do it. And you might not have because you couldn't afford to pay someone who did. Even if you did, or your contractor did, it would first require going to the paint store, then the hardware store, then the plumbing supply store, then the lighting store, and then the lumber yard. When the car runs were over, the weekend was practically over. That project? Left unfinished. But that was all before June 22nd, 1979. The day everything changed. A day that was made possible by two words uttered just 1 year before.
You're fired! Never let fear of failure or the potential of a setback paralyze you from decisions you'll have to make. If Bernie and I hadn't been fired, which I would label as a setback, we might not have started the Home Depot.
This is the story of Home Depot, and this is the story of its co-founder, Bernie Marcus.
Now, they call me a philanthropist, but the truth is I'm just really giving back. I'm giving back to this great country, which really gave me the opportunity to achieve the success that I've had. I've had a great life. Now, how did I get there? How did I get to the point where I'm a check writer? Did my family have money? No. Did I inherit money? No. Giving your money away is a long way from how I began my life. Mine truly is the story of America and the reality of living the American dream.
It's a story that starts in Russia, a story that starts out in desperation. Bernie later wrote, "In desperation, they picked up and left the only life they and generations before them had ever known."
Being Jewish, they were just, pillared, and it was not a safe place, and there was no future for them. And their entire family left, and they were able to get out. They would probably not be alive today. I wouldn't be alive today if they'd stayed back in Russia for sure.
Thankfully, they didn't.
I'm a first-generation American who started my life in a fourth-floor, walk-up tenement in Newark, New Jersey. My mother and father were Russian immigrants. They came to America with no money. They didn't read, write, or speak English. They came with nothing. They had nothing. But to them, that tenement was a paradise, a penthouse compared to what they had in Russia. My mother believed that America was the golden land, and wherever you put your mind to, you could achieve.
The tenement was so bad they tore it down to build a slum, Bernie now jokes. It was the only home I knew, of course, and I loved it.
I decided at a very early age of what I was going to be when I grow up. We were poor, and no one else in my family had a college education. But at the age of 12, I knew that I was going to be a doctor. That was my dream. By 13, I had studied all of the medical books in my doctor's office, and I knew the anatomy of the body. By 15, I was doing my own diagnosis when I went to the doctor. And by the way, I was more right than he was most of the time. After high school, I started my pre-med studies, and I was a pretty good student. In fact, I was so good that I qualified and I was accepted to Harvard Medical School. But because of quotas, and in those days, there were quotas for Jewish students, and it was 10% in medical school. I couldn't get in unless I donated $10,000 to the school. What a joke. We certainly couldn't afford that. If you took my entire family and you held them upside down, you couldn't raise $10,000. So medical school was out. I was discouraged, disheartened. My dreams were shattered. Frankly, for a time I gave up.
Bernie quit school, and he hitchhiked down to Florida.
How did I get from there to selling hammers? And that's a pretty long story, but it's interesting because when you think you know where your career will take you, it can turn out totally different. I know doctors who are real estate developers. I know real estate developers who are running medical companies. While you may be convinced there's only one way to fulfill a dream, you're going to find out there are many roads that lead you to your dreams. And those dreams may find you when and where you least expect it.
This is Lee Habib, and this is Our American Stories, the life of Bernie Marcus, born on this day in history, co-founder of the Home Depot. More after these messages, this compelling life story. This is Lee Habib, and this is Our American Stories. In this day in history, Bernie Marcus was born, and we're celebrating his life, the co-founder of Home Depot. And we left off, he'd faced quotas at Harvard. And by the way, we did a segment a few weeks ago in which we learned that Asians are now facing those very same quotas that Jews faced at Harvard. But let's now go back to Mr. Marcus's story.
Bernie didn't expect himself to be in the home improvement industry as the CEO of Handy Dan. But there he was, eating lunch every day with a colleague named Arthur Blank and working for a boss named Sandy Siegeloff. Here's their top public investor at the time, Ken Langone, on what he thought about old Sandy.
Father, you got to pray for me because this is a man I will never, he's dead now, but I will never forgive him, okay? He was a really cruel human being. That's a tough thing to say, but it's true. He had on his desk, he proudly had on his desk a sign that said, Ming the Merciless.
Well, Ming hated how Bernie had made the company successful.
Hated me, I hated him.
And he hated how Ken the Catholic and Bernie the Jew had become close.
He's a devout Catholic who swears like a sailor.
Ming was breathing down Bernie's neck about the threat Ken posed to his power. And so Bernie decided to do something about it.
And Bernie came to me one day and said he wanted me to sell the stock back to Siegeloff. Siegeloff didn't like me and I didn't like him. But I knew as long as I owned 19 or controlled 19% of the company, he wouldn't mess around with Bernie. Bernie persuaded me to sell the stock, and I said, Bernie, I'm signing a death warrant. He said, no. He says, he needs me. He needs me. I said, Bernie, I'm sorry. You're a dead man walking if I sell the stock. Anyway, he persuaded me to sell the stock at a huge premium because he wanted it. And 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was traveling and I got home late Saturday afternoon. My son, my then 14-year-old middle son, said, "Some guy's been calling you from California. He's been calling you 6 or 7 times today." And I said, "You leave a number?" He said, "Yeah." So I called him up. It was Bernie. And I said, "Bernie, you got fired. Is it in the papers yet?" I said, "No, but I understand you called here 6 or 7 times." He said he fired me, he fired Arthur, he fired Ron Brill.
And then, at the age of 49, how? I was fired. Fired. That had never happened to me before. I was 49 years old. I had a family, had obligations, and all of a sudden, my world came to an end for the second time in my life with what was a career-ending experience.
Bernie and Arthur were middle-aged men out of work, but it was wonderful, as Ken bizarrely told them.
It was one of the happiest days of my life. My immediate reaction was that, "Bernie, you just got hit in the ass with a golden horseshoe, and you don't know it."
I thought the man was demented. I thought there was something wrong with him.
And he said, "What are you talking about?" I'm saying, "Let's go into business. Let's start a company." And he was, "I'm out of a job. Are you nuts? I've got no money, and you want to start a company?"
Bernie was so fearful that someone else would steal his vision that he never even told Ken what it was.
And he said, "Tell me about it." And I said, "No, I'm not telling you about it because then you'll know about it." I said, "The only person that knows about it is in here, and I'm not going to share it with you."
He was that paranoid about it. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but let's do it. Because if it's that good and it's that dangerous, let it be ours."
Bernie finally shared his vision with Ken. It was time. Their time. Bernie's, Arthur's, and Ken's. Together.
1978, if you looked at it, a homeowner, typically if he wanted to do something in his house, he would have to go to a plumbing store, an electrical store, a lumber store, a hardware store, and so on. And prices were pretty high. And so typically if something had to be done in the house, they would have to get a professional to do it, which means a plumber, electrician, everything else. It was our concept that if we could have a store big enough to incorporate all of those things, hardware, lumber, electrical, at prices that were significantly lower. And I'm talking about a third lower, 1/3 lower. And then if we hired professional people like carpenters, like plumbers, like electricians, and teach homeowners how to do it themselves, that we could help America and grow a great business.
The first guy they tried to get on board to finance their vision was Ken's friend, Ross Perot. And Bernie showed up to the meeting in an old Cadillac, not thinking anything of it.
He said something peculiar. He said, "Well, our people don't drive Cadillacs." I said, "Well, what do you want me to do with this car?" And he said, "Bernie, our people don't drive Cadillacs." And I said, "Wait a second, Ross. I don't want to spend the money on a new car. We had this old car." And he said, "Bernie, our people don't drive Cadillacs." Well, the third time is all I needed. I had just finished with Sandy Siegeloff. I wasn't interested in being manipulated or controlled by anybody.
Bernie later wrote, if Perot hadn't been so hung up on Cadillacs, his original 70% share of the Home Depot stock would be worth approximately $58 billion today. Langone would secure $2 million from his group of New York investors, and they were off to the races.
No rest for the wicked and a hard-working Georgia man.
Bernie and Arthur settled on Atlanta as the home of their operations.
We all moved here. We knew nobody. And we had no family, no support group. All we had was each other.
They settled on Pat Farah as their chief merchant. They settled on an opening day, and on their ad in the big Atlanta newspaper that would announce their opening.
They didn't run it. The newspaper never ran it. It was like the worst thing that could have happened to you. Here you put all your money in, and the clock is ticking, and the money is going out, and you're paying people.
The day we opened up, we expected to see thousands of people. I mean, we were convinced that we were going to win the Super Bowl.
Our promotion was, come to the store, we'll give you the first $1. And we're handing out dollar bills.
And we threw this great party, and, nobody came. I mean, we just couldn't figure it out.
7 o'clock that night, we were still handing out the original dollar bills. Nobody had come. We were all broke. Not just myself. Arthur was broke. Pat was broke. We were all living on the edge, and this was the most important day of our life. We didn't have much money in the bank. We had great difficulty buying product because most of the people didn't want to sell us. The balance sheet was slim, to say the least.
The image wasn't right, so we figured, well, how do we fill it up?
Farrah's answer, fake it for now.
I contacted one of our suppliers and said, how many empty boxes do you have? They provided us about 3,000 boxes, just empty boxes. And we put them all together, put them up in the overheads to make it look like we were just so jam-packed that it was just unbelievable.
We had a stack of, 2,000 paint cans stacked up way up high in the ceiling. Out of the 2,000, I think maybe 300 were full of paint. The rest were all empty.
But we had to give the cans back.
So they needed more cash. And so Ken found them a venture capitalist who was interested. Here's Arthur Blank.
We had a deal with an investor from Boston, and he came down and he spent time with us, and Bernie drove him to the airport. There was a line of questioning having to do with our growth and our strategy and his involvement and things along that line, and Bernie got very uncomfortable with all of it.
The investor asked all of them to get rid of their company cars, take a 10% pay cut, and the last straw for Bernie? They'd have to pay for their own health insurance.
And Bernie has a temper and has got a lot of principle and believes strongly in ourselves and what we were doing. And his way of showing that was that if you want to step out of the car and we're going 50 miles an hour, you're welcome to do that.
It got worse. Staring down a third edition of Ming the Merciless in his life, Bernie yelled, "Get out of the damn car. You are a stupid son of a... You can walk to the airport for all I care." Bernie then got out of the car, and as the man timidly got out, Bernie tossed his luggage by the side of the road.
"Please don't leave me here,"
the man pleaded. After several minutes, Bernie relented and allowed him back in. The guys went on and got their funding, and most of all, they got people in the door.
And this is a great story that just keeps getting better. The life of Bernie Marcus celebrated on this day in history. Bernie was born, and we've celebrated Truett Cathy's life, Sam Walton's, Andy Groves, who recently passed, the founder of Intel. This is Lee Habib. This is Our American Stories. More on the life of Bernie Marcus after these messages. This is Lee Habib, and this is Our American Stories. And we continue now with our This Day in History segment, celebrating the life of Bernie Marcus, co-founder of Home Depot, born on this day in history. And as always, this segment is brought to us by Hillsdale College, the best place in America to learn about our nation's history, the Constitution, great literature, all the things that matter in life. And if you can't get to Hillsdale, Hillsdale will come to you with their terrific and free online courses at hillsdale.edu. And before we pick up on the produce piece, I want to just share a little reading from Built to Scratch. Bernie was writing about the early days at Home Depot in this book, which covers the life of Home Depot. Quote, "We had a singular vision that we sold over and over again. The first group we sold it to was the bankers. The second was the vendors. We used to tell people that we would lead our industry before long and be convincing when we said it, too. We dared them to look into our eyes when we said, "Do you think anything is going to stop us?" You must stick to a vision and turn people into believers. We had to be psychologists, lovers, romancers, and con artists to get them on board. And now let's return to this riveting life story.
Guys went on and got their funding, and most of all, they got people in the door. One day Bernie asked one of those people where she was from, and she said Athens. New to the area, Bernie had no idea where it was.
I said, "Oh, Athens." I said, that must be very close by. Is that? And she said, "You stupid boy." She said, "I drove 2 hours to get here, to this store." And I said, 2 hours? Why did you come here? And she said, well, her cousin had called her. And the reason her cousin had come, because somebody else had called her cousin. At that point, I knew that this was a winner. There was no question in my mind about it.
And so they doubled down. They opened more stores.
Marietta, now it's your turn to see what Atlanta's been talking about. The Home Depot. Atlanta now, Marietta, you've never seen anything like it.
Their model was working, but something much deeper was at work. The culture they created was at work.
We generated a fever, and we attracted people that were entrepreneurial. And when it's all said and done, these people didn't want to go home.
In one of those early days, Bernie told associate Lynn Martineau, "I didn't hire you to do, because you are going to have to do anyway. I hired you to think."
Bernie was the cheerleader and the inspiration, and the employees just cheered and felt that they were working for the best team in corporate America.
The core of their culture is something one of Bernie's golfing buddies was convinced would take them out of business. He was prepared to spend $200 on a new faucet, and a Home Depot associate, who he called stupid, showed him how to fix his old one for $1.50. A lost sale in his book, and he wouldn't tell Bernie who it was, thinking they'd get fired. And then Bernie shocked him when he said,
"How about if I give you a written guarantee that they won't be fired? How about if I tell you I'm probably going to give that person a raise?" Why? Because that person did exactly what we want them to do. We are there to save money for consumers, not to sell them products they don't need. And you know what? You're not the smartest guy in the world, but if you ever had something go wrong with your household plumbing again, where would you go? Right to that person. You just proved my point. You just proved how good our people are. The key is not to make the sale. The key is to cultivate the customer.
People who will spend 25 to 30 minutes explaining a $3 sale. Now, where do you find that?
So how did Bernie and Arthur create Home Depot's culture? You just can't make it by proclaiming it. They first did it by spending 25 to 30% of their time in the stores.
We never went with an entourage. We put on our orange aprons. We walked every aisle. We always dealt with customers ourselves. We dealt with the floor associates ourselves. We always asked them questions about the business. What are we doing well? More importantly, how can we improve? What are the customers asking for that we're not giving them assortment-wise? Is there any issue on pricing, any issue on different suppliers? I mean, we would probe a lot with them, and that gave them a sense that, you know, we're really important. We really count. We really matter. We're closest to the customers.
And Bernie and Arthur both personally spoke at every single training session for managers.
We wanted them to hear it from us and hear it consistently from us in the same sort of language.
Investors couldn't believe that after they had quote-unquote made it, with almost $30 billion in sales at that point, that they both were still speaking at every one of those training sessions. But Bernie said they had to. They have to hear it from our mouths. We're the they. When people say this is what they believe. And it made all of the difference. Almost all came to believe it and internalize it too, as the author of the book, A War for Talent, showed.
You know, he was about 6 companies that they profiled. I was the last person that he interviewed in our company. He interviewed about 100 of our associates, anywhere from cashiers to lot engineers, store managers, merchants, etc., United States and Canada. And he came in and he said, every place we went, we asked about the culture. We kept hearing the same things. Now, the words were a little bit different, but the essence was exactly the same. He said, somehow the beauty of this company, no matter where you go, United States, Canada, East, West, North, South, is that people express the same philosophy. Well, a lot of that, I think, came out of us doing the hands-on training, continuing to articulate the same values and same culture over and over and over again, and by only promoting people that actually believed in it and lived it and understood what our culture meant.
And I want to read to you about a couple of other ways Bernie and Arthur created that culture at the Home Depot. First, about why they don't have aisle numbers at the Home Depot, the only retailer with 100,000 square foot stores on the face of the planet that doesn't have them. In Built to Scratch, Bernie wrote, quote, "If I ever saw an associate point toward a customer what he or she needed 3 aisles over, I would threaten to bite that associate's finger. I would say, don't you ever let me see you point. You take that customer by the hand and you bring them right where they need to be and you help them." It was also a culture that they ingrained at the corporate office. In fact, they refused to even call it a corporate office. I had never heard of a company refusing to call it a corporate office before. Home Depot called it the Store Support Center. So everyone at headquarters knew what their real focus was, not on the vendors or on the investors, but on the individual stores. It was always about the culture and staying close to the customer. Home Depot took this emphasis on the stores even further. Every employee at the Store Support Center couldn't start there. They had to start somewhere else. Bernie wrote, quote, "We insist that every executive of this company works in the stores upon joining us. This policy even applies to our attorneys. When we hired Larry Smith as our first in-house attorney, we said, quote, before you assume your regular duties with us, you will be in the stores for 2 months. He didn't believe it. Are you crazy? He said. I'm a lawyer. Well, if you're going to be handling lawsuits, you're going to have to understand the problems of people in the stores, we told him. And to do that, you have to work in the stores so that when you hear a problem, you can actually relate to it. He did, and ever since, Smith has insisted that all of his new attorneys and paralegals also work in those stores. And when we come back, the final segment in the life of Bernie Marcus. This hour is always brought to us by Hillsdale College. And we'll get into the philanthropic giving of Bernie Marcus, as is so often the case with great American businessmen and so many Americans, our capacity to give. And this story of the 1%, Mr. Marcus started with nothing, built up something remarkable, brought down prices, delivered a great service to the American people, and at the end, gave most of it away. And this story happens again and again. This is the story of the 1%. Started in the 99%, became the 1%, and was generous with his wealth. This story you don't hear at most American colleges, but you will hear it over and over again here on Our American Stories. More after these messages. This is Lee Habib in the closing segment of an hour-long celebration of the life of Bernie Marcus, co-founder of Home Depot. We were just talking during the break, and I had mentioned that my mom took those courses. It wasn't just that Home Depot was a great store for men. My mom took those courses for women, and she, along with my 2 brothers, rebuilt our entire basement. Brick, carpentry, the whole 9 yards, and that's because of Home Depot's remarkable focus and vision on the customer and the customer satisfaction. And some people would have said, what a waste of money. Not Marcus, Blank, and Langone. And now the rest of this story.
There will always be some folks who just don't want to take care of the customer. So Home Depot brought on a guy named Ben Hill, who always would.
The name Ben Hill just came from, we were driving around 285, which is one of the highways that circle Atlanta, and we needed to come up with a name for a customer service call-in number, and we just saw an exit called Ben Hill, so we used that name, and it felt like something that would be kind of Atlanta-based.
At the front of every store, Ben Hill asks, "Are you satisfied? If not, call me, Ben Hill." Now, Ben Hill wasn't a real person, but there was a real person picking up that phone line. Actually, it was 3 people.
The 3 people that would respond to the calls are myself and Bernie and Pat Farah.
Bernie wrote and built to scratch. It didn't matter if we were signing $1 million deal. We stopped and took the call.
And we told the folks running the stores, the store managers and the assistant managers, that we would be taking all those calls. So to them, they said, well, the last thing we want to do is get, a customer calling in, speaking to myself or Bernie or Pat, and we would give the customer whatever they wanted, because that was our culture, that was our mentality, that was our approach to great service. And then call the store manager and say, why does this customer end up having to call us? You could have satisfied him in the store. Well, that decision had a lot to do with building the initial culture in our company, because what happened was that the folks running the stores, they got together with all the associates in their store, and they said, look, we don't want to get any phone calls from Bernie and Arthur or Pat, so we're going to satisfy every single customer that comes into this store. We want no Ben Hill calls. So they actually started to track them, and so the associates in the stores would do whatever they had to do to make sure the customer walked out with a smile on their face, which is really the culture of our company. We wanted them to react and act as though it was their names on the stores and not the Home Depot.
An associate named Larry Mercer took this culture to such an extreme that he once gave a customer a refund on tires he swore he bought at Home Depot, even though they didn't sell tires. Sure, some customers would come do that to you, but the vast majority would come to trust you, a value you couldn't put a price on. Lowe's emerged as Home Depot's first real competitor. And take a listen to Bernie's reaction.
I think that it was very important for Home Depot for Lowe's come along. I think that it was at a moment in time when we were very self-satisfied with ourselves.
And yet they'd never match Home Depot. Here's Arthur Blank sharing what Bob Tillman, the former CEO of Lowe's, told him.
We studied your company, in such an exhaustive way. Said we traveled all over the United States, Canada. We had stores in Chile at that time, and in Mexico, and he said, we probably spoke to 200 of your associates, and every place we went, we found that the associates believed in this unique customer service, and we copied your stores. We copied the size, we copied the pricing, we copied the vendor selection, we copied the signing, we copied everything we could copy. He said, the one thing that we could never copy, we could never understand how you were able to do it, was this culture, this unique culture you had of selling and putting the customer on top, taking care of the customer no matter what it took, et cetera, that we could not understand how that was done.
One of the most important ways it is done is by taking care of the associates who are on the front lines with the customers. They got there because they were given and deserved greater opportunity.
When I left the company, we had 150 offices. 2/3 of the offices never finished college.
And they got there because they were given an opportunity to participate in profit sharing, to grow as they helped grow the company. But it's not just about money. It's also about fulfillment, something Home Depot has offered to folks often forgotten, including with the so-called Bernie boys and girls.
We gave those senior citizens, if you will, who in many cases were very familiar with do-it-yourself, didn't want to work 40 hours a week, wanted to work 20 hours a week. Their spouse didn't want them home for lunch every day, and they wanted to interact with customers, and they knew the product, and they had a smiley face, and et cetera. So we brought a lot of those folks in on a part-time basis. And they were great. They were great with our customers. They were great role models for our associates, for our younger associates. So we looked for ways to give people who believed in us, ways to grow within our company.
In 1997, Bernie visited the store in Boynton Beach, Florida, and an older man started hugging him. "You changed my life," he said. I am the happiest person in the world." "That's terrific," Bernie responded. "You don't understand," the man said. "You hired me 5 years ago, when I was 70. Nobody else would hire me." Then he said, "Let me introduce you to some of my coworkers." And he brought over a whole cadre of guys and one woman who were all in their 70s. In fact, one guy was in his 80s.
Along with my partner, Arthur Blank, we created the Home Depot, which today has more than 2,200 stores, sales of over $80 billion, and employs more than 300,000 people. Remember, this happened because of our free enterprise system, where in fact you can create Home Depots. You can be successful. I was. This has had a bigger impact on the economy than 10,000 legislators in Washington.
But Bernie believes it couldn't have happened today.
If the same thing happened today, the Home Depot would open with 4 stores, and maybe we'd have 8. How sad is that? So what's happening to America?
Here's Bernie sharing just one example.
Litigation has killed off America. We figured out at the Home Depot that when you bought a tool, any tool in our store, I don't care if it is a saw, a drill, whatever it is, approximately 25% of the cost of that product was a deterrent at litigation. It was built in. It's insurance because they know they're going to get sued. Take a hammer, a stupid hammer. You know how many times the Home Depot has been sued because people dropped the hammer on their toes? You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. Idiot drops a thing on his toe and he sues us first.
But the story isn't over for America. Bernie's fighting back with the Job Creators Network.
We need to have 10,000 business people in every single state of the union who now speak out the same way, who get on air and say, you want to know something, that piece of legislation is garbage. And you know what? They lied to you. That is a lie on what they're going to do, because I know the effects of that on my business. I will not be able to hire people. I will have to fire people. I will have to let people go. I am not going to expand because you've taken away my ability to raise capital. I mean, they can go out there and speak the truth and say, I run a business here. Go attack a guy who owns 3 restaurants. He'll poison you the next time you eat there.
And the story isn't over for his wealth.
He wants to give his money away, he says, before he dies. And a lot of people don't think that. They want to pass on vast wealth to their children. Well, his children are fine, and they're fine people, too.
Bernie never forgot his responsibility.
I'm Jewish. We have a word called tzedakah. We grow up with it, and it means that you have to give back. It's part of our religion. It's part of who we are. You find Jewish philanthropists. You know, in the United States, we represent a 1.5% of the population and 18% of the philanthropy. No other country would have allowed me to succeed if I had born in Russia or Poland, where my parents came from. This could never have happened to me. So those of you who take this world lightly, you should not.
His partner, Arthur Blank, doesn't take lightly what Bernie has meant to him.
When I say that I love Bernie as my partner, I love him more as my brother and as my partner. I love him as my partner too, and he'll be my life partner. But you know, Bernie is a mixture of a brother to me, in some ways a father too. He's 14 years my senior, and I lost my dad when I was only 15 years old. So it's been a life partnership as opposed to just a business partnership, and for that I'm forever grateful.
And what a life story. And by the way, Bernie and his bride Billy gave $250 million to build the most magnificent aquarium on the face of the planet, the Georgia Aquarium. And note that it's not the Marcus Aquarium. He could have given it his own name, but he named it the Georgia Aquarium in honor of all the people of Georgia that made his story and that made Home Depot's story possible, and it revitalized a blighted part of the city of Atlanta. And by the way, Bernie learned about giving from his mom. They didn't have much, but even then, She was always there to teach the kids. No matter how little you had, you always had the obligation to give and to serve others. And that servant's heart serves us all today. The life of Bernie Marcus, here on Our American Stories, this day in history, born